Welcome to eCALLMS Inquiry Science Week 5, Drawing Conclusions. Our guiding question for this week is what strategies facilitate great discourse? Discourse strategies are useful throughout the inquiry process, in science and in other subjects, but we will discuss them in the context of the next step in the inquiry cycle, where students analyze the results of their experiments, evaluate their original hypotheses, and decide on next steps. The learning that takes place during the inquiry cycle naturally leads to a progression of language. As students go from pre-assessment to observations to gathering data and drawing conclusions, they're learning to speak in ways that are more formal and precise. They have more content area vocabulary, and they're following scientific conventions. It's important that their initial home language be seen as equally valuable and important as academic English. We're not trying to replace their home language with academic English. We want students to recognize that being able to speak academically and scientifically in two languages is a very valuable skill. At the same time as we move students forward in their academic language, we want to think of the inquiry cycle as a progression of thinking, where they move to deeper, more sophisticated understanding of concepts, where their misconceptions are challenged, and where their assertions are linked to data and evidence. Specifically, when we're drawing conclusions, teachers need to assist students in discussing data to aid in understanding, to relating data to their inquiry question, evaluating the strength of their evidence, challenging their deeply held intuitions and understandings, and then communicating those findings clearly. The conclusions they draw are not an end to the cycle. Ideally, we want conclusions to lead to new questions and the cycle of inquiry and curiosity to continue. In our context, discourse is conversation and dialogue about scientific learning. Students do most of the talking, but the teacher has a very important role in directing the discourse by using certain talk moves. A student says something, and you want to make a move that deepens the thinking or dialogue. Talk moves are literally phrases that you use to get at certain goals in the conversation. What are the goals of discourse? First, individual students share, expand, and clarify their own thinking. Second, students listen carefully to one another. Third, students deepen their reasoning. And fourth, students think with others. Let's start with our first goal. What do you say to get students to share, expand, and clarify their own thinking? The first option is to resist the temptation to jump in and give them time to think, saying nothing and letting their thinking take over. The second option is to let them tell you more by asking, can you say more about that? Or what do you mean by that? The third option is to simply restate what they're saying as a question. Our second goal is to get students to listen carefully to one another. As classroom teachers, you know how important this is for the establishment of successful classroom culture. A lot could be said about getting the habit of listening to other students ingrained. We praise students who track the speaker with their eyes, we celebrate students responding to what another student says, and we discourage interruptions. One talk move used to help students listen is to ask students to rephrase what another student says. Our third goal is to have students deepen their reasoning. One talk move is to ask students for evidence of their reasoning, and a second is to challenge their reasoning, sometimes with a counterexample. These two talk moves are especially useful for helping to connect conclusions to data or correct misconceptions. Our fourth goal is to have students think with others. To do this, we need to have students state whether they agree or disagree and why. We need to ask students to add on to the ideas of others. And we need to encourage students to help explain what someone else means using different words. As you explore these 9 talk moves, listen to which ones have the biggest impact on students' progression of thinking and language. Now, let's think about discourse with specific attention paid to our intermediate bilingual learners. Several considerations can help us tailor talk moves for bilinguals. The first is to reduce the linguistic complexity of our questions without reducing the cognitive complexity. We can do this by trying to make our questions shorter, more direct. We can speak slowly and clearly, refer to concrete items, and allow students to draw or use visuals to explain their thinking. One of the most important things is to give adequate wait time for students to consider their response and form the language they'll need to express their thinking. Another important consideration when planning discourse with bilinguals is grouping. Each grouping consideration has pluses and minuses. You know your bilingual learners, so you'll have to make your decision based on that knowledge. If you use whole group discussion, the teacher can guide discussion to certain ways of thinking and communicating, and more fluent English speakers and science thinkers can model for others. The drawback is that some students are more likely to participate, and it will be easier for others to hide in the crowd, especially with the high anxiety factor of speaking in front of a group. If you use cooperative groups, more students will be able to participate to some extent, and there will be a lower anxiety factor, but the teacher can only guide one group at a time. One option that can be a happy medium between these two is to use small groups in a station or rotation format. If you can do this and rotate through all student groups, you get the added benefit of a teacher directing the discussion with all students, and a decreased anxiety factor with more opportunities to communicate. Remember from week 3, for bilinguals, being in a competitive thinking and communicative environment with native English speakers can be intimidating. How will you keep a high level of thinking and discourse and address the anxiety factor? It could be through grouping, through the use of native language, through talk structures, or any number of other ways. In this week's Explore, you'll have the opportunity to examine talk moves in greater detail, either through videos or from reading one of 2 short articles. We hope you'll employ these talk move strategies in a way that challenges all of your students, and we hope you see increased participation from your bilingual students in meaningful, rich, thought-provoking dialogue. Again, thank you for all that you do.